Welcome everybody to this edition of the Urban Equities Chats webcast. My name is Andre Darmanin from Urban Equity Consulting. Today's topic is on self-care within the EDI space. And who I have today are Joanne Kinya Baker, who goes by pronouns she, her, and elle, and Michael Bowe, who is an equity leader. His pronouns are he, him, and his. And today's topic, we are going to discuss various areas of the aspects of self-care within the profession itself, and what kind of issues and issues to deal with that come about, and also looking at strategies and solutions in order to become self-aware of how do you take care of yourself within self-care, because of the fact that we give a lot of advice to employers and to people within the EDI space, but we don't take care of ourselves. So this is something that we need to do and be more proactive on for ourselves moving forward. So with that, I'll start off the webcast itself by first talking about, also mentioning a disclaimer in this, is that this webcast episode that's being recorded is not meant to provide advice for anybody per se, because of the fact that there's a social, it's within the social work profession. And if you seek advice on this or seek assistance and whatnot, please see a mental health practitioner or a therapist moving forward. So with that, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement that I normally do for these webcasts. So as a settler within this, with where I am situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So with that, I'm going to start with the introductions of my guests today. So I'll start with Michael Bowe. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing right now.
All right. Well, I've been a leader of equity provincially within this sector of child welfare for the most part, but my work is cross-sectorial. So that's where I do most of my labor, but I do have my own consultancy, Bowe's and Associate Inc., that I do work privately. I've been, I guess, an equity leader for many, many years. I believe I said over 25. If I didn't, it's been over 25 years, from the Jane and Finch community to York region to Simcoe, Muskoka, and so forth and beyond.
All right, thank you, Michael. And to yourself, Joanne.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Joanne Kinya Baker, and I'm also in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. In addition to that, I also work in the anti-racism space and also working towards learning more about how I could be a supportive ally in the accessibility space. My professional background has dabbled in working in different times in my career around mental health, but most of the time I've worked with equity deserving populations like refugees, racialized individuals as well, and other people on the intersectionality spectrum. Currently working in the government arena on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I also do have my own consulting firm as well, Shades of Humanity Consulting, which is a DEI consulting firm that really works to support organizations to build their equity goals and to also build racially equitable systems within their organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks, Michael, for that. So let's start with the conversation. As I said from the outset, as equity practitioners, anti-racism practitioners, we provide advice to professionals itself when we're looking at strategies and ways for them to take care of themselves. How do we build our organization so that we have those options given to employees and to organizations in terms of providing that self-care because they want to tell their stories and be comfortable with that. But yet, with the work that we do and the stories that we listen to, it takes a toll on us. So there's racial trauma, there's toxicity with that, there's code switching, and it affects us as practitioners. So what I want to throw out to both you and Joanne and Michael, is let's talk about those issues that we are seeing within the professions and what kind of toll it takes on us moving forward, and what do we need, and what are we seeing out there? What have you experienced yourselves? Tell us your stories. Anybody can start.
Okay, well, I guess I will start. Yeah, it's a very important subject matter that you brought to the fore, Andre. There's a lot of equity and inclusion leads, both within the corporate and the public sector, that are experiencing a great deal of weathering. And that word weathering came about as a result of how Black folk in particular, in these positions, experience organizations, and even out of those positions, just Black folk in general, and how they get weathered in these institutions, trying to do the work and trying to survive anti-Black racism. And it really speaks to the idea of folks being aged prematurely in terms of their mental health, their wellness, their bodies, their soul, their spirit, being prematurely aged. And it is often said, if you're working in an organization, especially for someone that you report directly to, and they're very toxic, it takes at least 10 years off your life. So that term weathering really comes from that. Then it's spanned to include Black and brown folk and Indigenous peoples as well. So this is the sort of thing that folks experience generally in those identities, but equity leads also in particular in trying to carry this heavy load on your back. And oftentimes it's under resources, not a budget. You don't have a team. Sometimes you don't have administrative support. You're the least looked upon around the managerial table. If indeed you get into the executive suite, your role is diminished and not really found to be credible by your counterparts. So it's really a place of loneliness and a place of isolation and a lack of support and affirmation. So that has been my experience over the years, working across sectorally and even presently.
I love that, Michael, and I like that you talked about weathering, because when I think about some of the things that I've experienced and stories that I've heard and held for other people, I think about gaslighting, but now you've also brought in new language on weathering and how gaslighting is one of those ways that weathering happens in the workplace. And for the folks that are not familiar, if I could just explain, gaslighting is a psychologically manipulative tactic to get a person or group of people to doubt their reality or their memory or whatever's happened to them or their experience. And so when I think about some of the things that we go through as equity practitioners, specifically when talking about race, a gaslighting statement could sound like, are you sure that was racist? Are you overreacting? Or even in the case of gender, it's like, are you sure you didn't see it differently because you're a woman, right? And so when we experience gaslighting, not only do we start to doubt our reality, but we also develop this imposter syndrome around the work that we're doing. And it's very fair to say that a lot of us in this space really do struggle with that imposter syndrome because of the weathering that Michael talked about earlier. And so I think that is one of the ways we can start to identify when we need to check in within ourselves around how can we handle this weathering and this gaslighting that we're experiencing in the work that we do before we can move on to talking about mental health and taking care of ourselves.
Thanks for that, Joanne. And here I am, navigating this space myself. And listening to those stories that we hold. But also the thing is that we have to deal with, things like code switching, listening to the racial trauma that we have to, not only to the stories that we have, but also the ones that we have within ourselves, because it takes a toll on us, the weathering, as you said, Michael. So, I mean, to the both of you, it's, as Black people here, and, as racialized people within other communities, hearing these stories and taking it all in, this is something that it takes a toll on us as professionals. So, what are we doing? How are we going to make sure that this doesn't happen for us? And what do we need to do moving forward? To deal with such things as the code switching, as I mentioned, or to deal with the gaslighting, as you mentioned, and the weathering and whatnot. So these are things that even I'm not 100% not necessarily familiar with, but it's more like I haven't been able to be a part of that discussion, and I've taken it in myself. And I tend to sometimes think to myself, why am I taking this all to myself? So to the both of you, I mean, you have both experience with this, and what kind of things do we need to look for when we're dealing with this? So Joanne, you want to start with that?
You know what? That's a really good thing. I'm still reflecting on the code switching, because I find that code switching is something that we do so that we can survive. It's like a survival tactic. It's like one of those things that we do to protect ourselves so that we can navigate safely. It's obviously not authentic, because when you're code switching, you're basically attuning yourself to what you believe the audience wants to hear, but you're also protecting yourself. And I strongly believe that code switching can end and stop when you have been provided with a culture that is open to receiving you in your authentic self. I'm still yet to find one of those places. And until then, we're going to keep code switching, unfortunately. However, with gaslighting, Andre, I would want to say that there's a couple of ways that we could maybe think about how to position ourselves, or how to deal with gaslighting, right? And these are actually some tips from a therapist. And so, the first one I would say is stand firm in your truth. Like, if you believe and you know that this is your truth, that what you are experiencing is as a result of an inequity, stand firm in it. In that, if someone's going to try and sway you, you already know that this is your truth and you are speaking your truth. The other thing that I would encourage folks to do is to write things down. When you write things down, you're really able to have that capture of how things happened. Because another thing that happens with gaslighting is if the gaslighting starts to get to us, we start to forget the things that actually did happen, which is really the goal of the gaslighter. So write things down. Another thing is keep the conversation simple and know your purpose when you're entering into the conversation. Ask yourself a question around what would you like to accomplish when having this conversation. Be willing to leave the conversation. Okay, so if you feel that your tactics are not working and the person is deflecting, denying, be true to yourself and know when to leave the conversation, because gaslighting sometimes can also just leave you in a place of not just having the self-doubt, but it's also starting to really deeply impact your mental health. And we want to protect that. So leave the conversation, and then do not worry about trying to outsmart the gaslighter. That's super important. Right? We're not going head to head here. Remember, your reality is your story. Your story is your reality. You do not need to outsmart the person who's gaslighting you. And honestly, once you're really able to ground yourself in some of these things, you'll take charge of your own reality. Yeah. And Michael, I'll pass that over to you as well.
Absolutely. Those are some really deep considerations for folks to take away, and they will help you tremendously to sort out your thoughts, to ground your truth on paper, so it reminds yourself of what has happened, and you're not, as Joanne mentioned, caught up in the distraction of someone trying to put illusions in your mind. Did this actually happen to me? So that's so important. And I just want to add, take care of yourself through the course of that. Make sure you're just as planful and surgical in caring for yourself as you are with booking appointments for work and so forth. Plan a reparative self-care plan for yourself at home, and literally book in time to care for self, book in time for that walk, book in time to actually make that phone call. Because you sit on the couch, watch Netflix for about 7 hours and realize, oh, I didn't call that friend, or I didn't go for that walk or hike. And also be intentional. Learn a new skill, because that really takes you and draw you away from work and those ruminating and obsessive thoughts about that gaslighting moment. You're thinking obsessively as opposed to focusing on your circle of love, your family, your friends, and yourself. So in addition to all that Joanne has mentioned, make sure you care for yourself. Make sure that also you are prepared to leave the situation. I've been in an organization in the not too distant past where I had to walk away from a situation that wasn't getting any better. And in fact, the organization went through a ministerial review, and the CEO and COO was subsequently replaced. That organization was very toxic. And I realized over time that I was holding that toxicity together in my position as their equity specialist. I was holding it in place that because folks normally use EDI lead positions or expert-centered positions as a thermometer as to the climate in the organization and the culture. Is it toxic? Is it not? And so on. So whether they should or not. But I realized that I was holding things together by quieting folks internally, by subduing certain situations through generally trying to fix them, as well as engaging community when things kind of collide with the organization. So I left on faith at the top of the pandemic back in April 2020, and essentially with no job on the onset and so forth, when people were worried about their jobs and all that. And then 2 weeks later, things came to a review. So sometimes by staying within a toxic environment in our roles as equity lead could be very damaging, and you could, without knowing, collude with that toxicity and create more harm to equity-seeking identities in the organization, Indigenous folks.
You
And
know what,
that's
Michael?
sorry,
Sorry, I
Joanne.
just wanted to add one more thing in addition to what Michael said about connecting with people. Get into a community of practice. And I think a lot of folks in this space can benefit so much from being a part of a community of practice. Not only do you get the emotional support that you need in a community of practice, but you also get the tools. You also get to bounce ideas off people so that you're not alone in this. And there is something so special about being in the storm together with other people, because it takes away a lot of that turbulence, right, that you would experience on your own.
Yeah, and that's critical. And I'm thankful, Joanne, to you that you actually introduced me to that circle, that circle of practitioners itself, because I've heard stories of what people are, or what practitioners are experiencing within the profession, and it's good to bounce ideas from with those other practitioners to say, how would you handle this situation? And because in your head you want to handle it one way, but it's better to have ideas bounced off with other people so that you can have a better response to what you want to, what the message you want to convey. And so I want to dial it back for a minute, because there's something, Michael, that you had mentioned here about safety, for instance. And I want to go back to the whole thing about gatekeeping, because that becomes a huge issue for anti-racism practitioners, especially because we go into this profession with guns a-blazing, if you will, because of the fact that we want to be activists, we want to make change within an organization. But yet the thing is that, you know, we're going to have a lot of resistance from leaders. We have to get the buy-in, but still there's going to be a lot of resistance. But then as time goes on, we sometimes we become gatekeepers because we have to make money at the end of the day. So that becomes an issue for ourselves. So you know, what do we need to do? How do we balance the chairs here, if you will, to prevent that gatekeeping from happening, but actually advocating for change within an organization without having that worry in your head that I'm going to get fired, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to be demoted. And I think there was a, you know, even a story that you told me a while back about your situation about that. So, you know, Michael and Joanne, I mean, first, Michael, you want to talk about that specifically?
Yeah, I think it's really important to self-interrogate, self-question why you're doing what you're doing as an equity leader in an organization. Is it for the money, or is it for the purpose of being transformative in the work that you're doing to dismantle anti-Black racism in all its intersecting forms? So it's very crucial that we continually self-interrogate ourselves, and we have communities that could do that for us, that could ask us those questions. Why are you in this? Because I agree with you that in the sense that equity leads, as do everyone, because community tells me that they'll say, Michael, you know, you're wearing the golden handcuffs, you know, you're getting paid by the organization and your benefits and so forth. So there's certain things that we could say and do that you can't. So sometimes you need to step out of the way so we could bring what we need to bring to the organization, as well as hold you accountable to the role that you're doing and to what you need to deliver. Because if you're not doing that, you need to get a step in. So I need a body that keeps me accountable, which is community. You can't do this work without community involvement and community advice, voice, as well as community direction. They should be leading the work as opposed to us trying to perform surgery on ourselves, because we can't fix ourselves. We need external community voice and push to do that. And folks in equity seeking roles need community to push them and the organization. But yes, indeed, we could be gatekeepers for the organization, and perhaps folks when they're hiring equity leads, they are looking for that. Who's a good fit for the organization? Who won't disrupt us or call us in to a conversation or out when we need to and embarrass. So sometimes I would guess that equity leads are chosen on that basis, in addition to their skill sets, those who are a good fit. But we have to make sure as equity leads that, again, we're there for the right reasons. Now, oftentimes, most of our institutions are led by those who are racialized white. You know, child welfare, essentially we got our first Black CEO that runs an agency. It was I guess the beginning of this year. Prior to that, we had someone who was racialized brown, Baines out of PLCAS. But the rest of the field is racialized white, as is most institutions. So we rely very heavily on those who are classified back in the 60s by Martin Luther King Jr. and others as moderate whites. And today we say neoliberals. They're the ones running things, and they do want change, and they're very active, and they're on the front lines with us. They're our partners, our friends, our confidants, and all that. But at times, too often, they're gatekeepers. Why don't you slow down? I like what you're saying, but your approach is a bit, it's not time yet. We'll get there. And then we'll get there turns into a year, 2 years, 5, 10 years, and so forth. So we have to be very careful that we also call those folks into account who at times are our leaders and those who we report to. So we are in a bind of gatekeeping for them as they're gatekeeping as well. So oftentimes, dare say, equity leads embedded in organizations tend to be moderate. If they're not, they tend to burn very bright and then they leave the organization, or they work for a brief period of time, then take maybe 3 months off to repair their mental health. Then they come up blaze bright, and then they go off again. But you need everyone. You need those who blaze bright. You need your moderates. You need your community. Those who are called radicals. You know, you need everyone involved, pushing from all angles. It can't just be moderates within institutions or those who are pushing from outside. You need all hands on board.
Before Joanne, I mean, my favorite word, and I use that term loosely, is cultural fit. And that's probably one of the worst things I can see, especially when you're hiring equity practitioners itself. Is just, why are you doing it if you're looking for change? If you're looking to remain with the status quo, you're going to burn people out overall. And I'll leave it to you, Joanne, to continue the conversation about this.
I think Michael said it all, and he said it really well. And I would add something by Ainania Ayodele, where she says, if you are called to lead equity in institutions, it ought to be a calling and not a trend. It is critical to know the following. There's a couple of things that she talks about, but I want to talk about one point where she says, be clear on your priorities and focus on those wins. You're not going to be able to fix everything. She also said, release the need for external validation, reward, and fame. Right? And then finally, she says, appreciate each and every win. Everything is significant, and be sure to celebrate.
Yeah, that is so true. And, listening to your points about, about taking everything in, because as equity practitioners, you want to solve the issues, but at the same time, it's like, we're not experts in all of this. I'm not an expert in neurodiversity or neurodivergent communities. I'm not an expert in accessibility per se. So sometimes everyone tries to draw themselves in and learn everything and say that you're an expert in everything. But you know what? That also leads to burnout itself. And yeah, actually, I forgot my other point, but you know what? I think we've basically had this discussion. We have this discussion, and it gives us an opportunity to think about where we need to go moving forward as equity practitioners, as anti-racism practitioners, to start to say, what do we need to do for ourselves? What do we need to watch out for? So I think I want to basically conclude our discussion here today with some final thoughts. Yeah, sure,
Andre,
go ahead.
Speak to the code switching, because I think it's so important. I just want to add to what has been said around that.
Sure.
Because as a cisgender Black male, I am exceptional, I guess, when it comes to the human services field, the social services field. We're very rare. And I know that tethered to my body, to my identity of being Black and male, are certain stereotypes, as there are with other identities, right? When we think of a nurse, our mind goes somewhere in terms of gender identity. When we think of a doctor, our mind automatically goes there and so forth. So our minds take shortcuts. I mean, our unconscious mind could process 400 billion bits of information per second at a speed of 100 miles per second. But our conscious mind, only 2,000 bits of information at a speed of just 100 to 150 miles per second. So obviously our unconscious mind outpaces our conscious mind, and 95% of the decision as a result that we make are made unconsciously, right? So when I walk into spaces, I know that there are certain unconscious biases that folks might have of me without even being aware of it. And it might come out in seeing me as being a certain way that I'm not. It might be certain stereotypes or that aggression or there's just a bunch of them tethered to Blackness and male. So when I go into certain spaces, and most of them are populated by cisgendered women or racialized white, I have to be very careful how I present myself, my tone, the cadence of my words, my volume, when I speak, when I choose not to speak, how I carry myself in various spaces, my posture, and all those pieces. It sounds rather silly, but it's a constant self-monitoring to ensure that I'm showing up in a way that would deflect certain biases that people generally tether to someone who looks like me, who's walking my body. So it's really important to sort of highlight that, because I know the first thing that Black males generally ask me when they come in conversation with me is like, how do I keep safe when they're getting into social work? So we'll have a conversation about that and so forth. So it might sound far-fetched, silly, and so forth, but it's very real, because all you need is an accusation that would basically ruin your name and your reputation. So I do want to just throw out the importance of that code switching, which we all code switch, including those who are the most powerful in our institutions. No one could be themselves in these institutions. The way that someone, I'm sure, who's racialized, white, male, cisgendered, et cetera, operate in the workplace is very different than how that person's operate at home, I'm sure. So I think to some level or the other, we all code switch to fit this idealness of whiteness and what whiteness says we should be in these workspaces, every single one of us. But the burden is even greater on those who are racialized, Black, brown, and indigenous.
Those are excellent points. And, now going back to, as we conclude this, there's a couple of things that also came to mind where, Joanne, when you, or Michael, when you talked about trends, this is, this is something that I've been experiencing, as I was going through graduate school, for instance. It's like, yeah, it's a great area. It's a trend that's happening. You should join that. And it's like, this is not a trend. This is something that has gone on for a long time, but yet now you decide to want to take action. So how does that make me feel entering the practitioner or the profession itself and entering that space when you hear those racialized white voices telling you, yes, it's something that you should be going into. So that's something that I really took offense to when I started getting to this, and also those unconscious biases that we have, especially for myself too, as someone who's got a broader shoulders, who has sometimes also has racial imposter syndrome because I can be white passing myself. So it's like, why are you in this profession? And am I Black enough to be in this profession? So those are even things that I've taken in as a professional moving forward, but yet I still would like to do this work, but yet I still have those inner feelings myself. So these are great points that we've addressed, and the stories that we've heard from the both of you regarding this. So on that, I want to conclude our conversation here. I know we've talked about strategies and with regards to dealing with this, but is there anything else you want to add when it comes to strategies or actions in terms of how we should be taking care of ourselves as practitioners? So I've opened the floor to the both of you in terms of this.
Yeah, I could just add quickly the top part of Ainania's address when she said that she learned this from an elder, that the broom will wear out, but the dirt never wears. So don't wear yourself out. She also says, pause frequently, disconnect from the work. And that is super important, that we just can't be on the go, go, go. I'm speaking to myself here as well as an exhausted person in equity work, but taking a vacation from tomorrow. And the other thing is, surround yourself with unconditional, loving people and spaces. Stay or become grounded in a mindful practice and make it consistent and necessary. And finally, return to self, be guided through your intuition. Super important.
Michael, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Before I do, I just want to say that the brilliance of bringing up the trends, don't follow trends, that was Joanne's point through the quote that she read. But definitely, what would I like to add? Okay, what comes to mind is try not to bleed all over
Mm.
the boardroom table in order to further the journey of equity in your organization. And even more so, don't ask others of equity seeking identities to bleed on those tables. What I mean by that is to open up old wounds of racial harm and racial violence and telling those stories in order to motivate those who are in places of power to act. No systemic change, organizational change strategy will survive on people telling their harms, their hurts, and so forth over and over again in order to drive people's emotions and motivate them, those in power, to do stuff. You need a plan that is based on more foundational stuff. And we call it trauma porn in I guess equity spaces or the equity literature, is when folks look in a very gawking way at someone's trauma. And oftentimes what we do is form a listening table where you might have, and I've been a part of them, where you have maybe a boardroom table of maybe 60 leaders, all racialized white. You might have one person who isn't. Then you bring in, the last one I've attended is with Black staff, and they sit in the middle of that square, and they start sharing their pain, their hurt, their harm, stories after stories. Some of them might leave crying and come back after sort of patching themselves a little, just to motivate leaders to move. Don't, in terms of self-care, don't get caught up in that, and don't encourage others to open up those wounds, whether old or new, because who's going to stitch that person back up in that evening? How are they going to self-care to kind of recover and so forth? So that's really important, because I think some of us use that, either equity leads to kind of motivate folks to do stuff, or we try to bring in others to tell their stories. In the disability community, it's called performance porn, where someone might say, well, if that person, have no arms or legs and could do this, then I should be able to do that too. The disabilities community said, don't use us like that. Don't, for your motivation. So I would encourage folks, don't get caught up in those places. And just to go back to what Joanne said earlier, find that community of practice. It's an amazing space to be in. Find also your community of love, whether that be your circle of love could contain family members, and family I define broadly, it's whoever you love and they love you and support you and so forth. And then of course, your community, your broader community. Those are very, very important. And as I mentioned, be planful, strategic, and very surgical with plotting out your self-care and literally scheduling it just like you would your regular work day. Else you will not do it. You will not get it done.
All right. Yeah, that was well said, Michael. And to the both of you, I really appreciated this conversation. It's timely, it's well worth it, and for people to listen to and to learn from. So I want to conclude this our conversation by just being a little bit vulnerable or open, if you will. What are you both doing, whether it's this weekend or whether it's in general? What are you doing in terms of how you're filling your cup in terms of your own self-care? Go ahead to either one of you.
I'm an extrovert, so I'm really excited to get together with a few people safely this weekend and just get together over food. I think for me, food is definitely my top level of self-care, like good food, not just food. And so I'm really excited to do that, excited to just disconnect from the work and to get on the road and drive to Montreal next week, just to experience that too. Yeah, so I'm super pumped for that. Yeah.
For me, I was planning to spend it with my partner and my two boys, but you have to book time with these teenagers. It's so hard to pull us together. So I'm thinking, given that at least one of them has a birthday party to go to, I was thinking of asking my partner whether she would like to go out for dinner or some drinks or what have you. I am going to Montreal actually for the Formula One race. It's coming, I think, June 17th. So we booked it's going to be a family affair. We told the boys, come on, just give us some time on your busy schedule. So, we're trying to sort of book some stuff for the summer, different cottages and lakes, and doing fishing and water things, I guess. So, yeah, that's it.
What about you?
Yeah, for me, I'm this weekend, since it's a long weekend here, it's my partner and I, we're doing a full, actually on Sunday, Easter Sunday, we're doing the whole sports pedicure for me and a pedicure for her, and then of course a couples massage. So her and I are just going to enjoy that Sunday. And like you, Joanne, not only am I an extrovert, meeting up with some friends prior to a dinner. We're going to, my partner and I, we're going for dinner on Saturday. So usually that's the kind of thing I like to do, is just, get together with her and also get together with friends, because it just takes time, takes it off the work that you're doing off your shoulders, and you disconnect from all that and have fun, enjoy yourself, and just do what you love. And I think that's what you can't take yourself away from. And this is what I'm hearing from the both of you. And that's probably one of the things on my bucket list, Michael, of going to the Formula One in Montreal, because that's something that, I'm not much of an F1 fan, but at the same time, it's something to do. Right.
Yes,
so
it is.
So there you go. So
Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, both of you go.
Especially for the extroverts in this space, I found too, whereas we also recharge with being with other people, it's also super important to be very strategic and mindful for the self time. And that's something that I'm learning too. And I'm learning this from my husband, who's an introvert, and he really values the self-care, self-time. So I think just coming back to how we also connect, that personal reflection time is also really, really crucial and important. And I have to remind myself that. I love the energy from the outside.
Exactly. Michael, I think you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm mostly an introvert, so I rejuvenate, energize by being with myself, by myself, or with small groups. So definitely, I'm not an extrovert. But I wanted to say that I tried the pedicure. I think it was the last long weekend. The whole family, we went, and it was amazing. It was my very first time, and I think it's still there. My mom been bothering me because back home in Jamaica, I kick off my big toe a lot at the nail, and it just looks nasty. So I didn't want anyone to touch it or see it. But I went, and they did a good job, and it was very relaxing. Oh man, I'm like, oh, what have I been missing? But anyways, yeah, you're gonna enjoy it.
And so where can we find you on social media, or how can people connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Joanne Kinya Baker. So happy to connect with folks there as well. And on Instagram, it's at shadesofhumanity.ca.
You could find me on LinkedIn. Just, I guess, search for Michael Bowe, and I'll come up. I live on LinkedIn, and have a pretty big following, I guess, crowd or audience that follow me week by week. I try to post once a week, and then you could find me on Twitter as well.
Well, that concludes today's webcast on self-care for equity practitioners. I'd like to thank Joanne and Michael for this fruitful and timely conversation between the both of us. And I'd like to conclude by, what I'd be remiss in saying is, Ramadan Mubarak for those in the Muslim community, for the Sikh community, Happy Vasakai, and for the Christian and Catholic communities, Happy Easter. Hope everyone enjoys its safe weekend, and I look forward to the next time in having the next webcast. Thanks, everyone.